You haven't eaten in 2 days, but you know exactly where the herd is, tracked yesterday, prints read, the whole route already mapped out in your head. Today was supposed to be simple. Walk, find them, eat, then the air changes. That heavy mineral smell right before a storm. First, it's a few drops. Nothing. You've walked through worse. Then it's a wall of water, sideways, driven by wind that doesn't quit. An hour passes. It doesn't ease up. Then the afternoon. Still coming. Then night falls. And somehow the rain gets heavier, not lighter. Morning arrives. It's still falling, like it never intended to stop at all. By now the ground has turned to soup. Every track you memorized yesterday is gone. Erased. Step wrong on the slick rock underneath, and an ankle rolls. And out here, a rolled ankle isn't an injury, it's a sentence. Somewhere behind camp, the river is climbing its banks inch by inch, and the fire, the only thing between you and the cold, between you and every set of eyes watching from the tree line, is starting to gutter. This was never boredom. This is a trap, closing slowly enough that you almost didn't notice the door shut. For almost all of human history, rain wasn't a mood. It was an emergency. And what people did to survive that emergency may have shaped us more than anything they ever did under a clear sky. Today, rain means closing a window, pouring a coffee, pulling a blanket over your legs, and pressing play on something. It's white noise. It makes you drowsy before the first episode even ends. 50,000 years ago, that exact same sound, the one lulling you to sleep right now, had 3 different ways to kill you before it stopped falling. The first is cold. A wet human loses body heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. No clothing worth the name, no waterproof shelter. A long storm in anything under about 50 degrees Fahrenheit could push your core temperature into hypothermia territory within hours. And most of the world our ancestors lived in got that cold at night, even parts of Africa, once you climbed to higher ground during the wet season. The second is flooding. Caves and rock shelters. The main real estate available to early humans tend to sit at the base of hillsides or right along rivers, for obvious reasons. Water, game, shade. Which also makes them flood magnets. Archaeologists have pulled layers of flood sediment out of caves that were clearly occupied at the time, meaning the water came in while people were still living there. Some of those sediment layers are thick enough that the site was simply never used again. The third, maybe the worst, predators. Rain doesn't just drive humans into shelter, it drives everything into shelter. And sometimes everything means the exact cave you're already in. There are sites in South Africa where human remains and large cat remains turn up in the same layer at the same time. Some of those human skulls carrying puncture marks that line up perfectly with leopard teeth. So rain didn't just make life unpleasant. It compressed the entire ecosystem, predator, prey, and human, into the same small, dry pockets of space at the same time. And in the middle of that pressure cooker, one job outranked everything else, keeping the fire alive. And that job carried a specific kind of dread. Before roughly 40,000 years ago, we genuinely don't know how reliably people could start a fire from nothing. There's solid evidence of controlled fire use going back at least 400,000 years at a site called Kesem Cave, and possibly close to 1,000,000 years at Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa. But controlling a fire that already exists and creating one from scratch are 2 completely different skills. And for a huge stretch of our history, plenty of people could only do the first one, which means if your fire went out, you might not get it back. Some groups solved this by transporting the fire itself, smoldering embers wrapped in green leaves or packed inside a tough, woody fungus that grows on tree trunks, which can hold a spark and smolder for hours without dying. Basically, a biological lighter you could carry between camps. We're not guessing about this. When researchers found Otzi, the 5,300-year-old man preserved in ice in the Alps, he had a complete fire-starting kit tucked in his belt pouch. That same tinder fungus, flint, a chunk of iron pyrite for striking sparks, and backup plant tinder, in case the first batch failed. 5,000 years after our story starts, losing your fire was still such a serious risk that people carried dedicated gear just to prevent it. So, when the rain hit, shelter wasn't priority 1. The fire was. Move it deeper into the cave, block the wind and spray with hides or brush. Feed it carefully. Not too much, not too little. Hunt for dead lower branches on conifers, the ones still shielded by the canopy above, usually dry even in a downpour. Split open soaked logs to get at the dry heartwood inside. Use birch bark to catch the first flame, because birch contains a compound called betulin that will actually burn even when wet. For hours at a time, One person's entire job might have been sitting next to that fire, tending it, shielding it, making absolutely sure it didn't die, because that fire wasn't a convenience. It was heat, light, protection, cooked food, and the one place the whole group gathered. Letting it go out wasn't carelessness. It could be a death sentence for everyone in the cave. Okay, so the fire's holding, everyone's mostly dry, but nobody's going anywhere. So what do you actually do with days of forced downtime? You build things. The archaeological record is not subtle about this. Caves and rock shelters are stuffed with evidence of manufacturing, stone tools at every stage of production, and piles of the tiny flakes that fly off when you're shaping one, concentrated in exact spots, right next to where the firelight would have reached. And it wasn't only tool making. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered a 100,000-year-old pigment workshop. Abalone shells used as mixing bowls, ochre ground down into powder, bone tools for stirring and applying it. That's not survival. That's a production line, run by someone sitting through a storm with a system. Then there are bone needles, showing up in the record around 61,000 years ago in South Africa, later across Europe and Asia. These are small, precise, with a hand-drilled eye barely wider than a hair. You don't make one of these while you're sprinting from a threat. You make it sitting still, focused, with hours to spare. Rainy days handed people exactly that. This is where the story stops sounding like survival and starts sounding almost unbelievable. At a Neanderthal site called Abri du Maras in France, archaeologists found a tiny fragment of twisted plant fiber cord, roughly 52,000 years old, the oldest direct evidence of string we've ever found. And at Hohlefels Cave in Germany, they pulled out a 35,000-year-old tool carved from mammoth ivory, 4 drilled holes, spiral grooves, built for exactly one purpose: twisting plant fibers into rope. Someone sat down in that cave and carved a dedicated rope-making machine. Making rope is slow, repetitive. It demands patience and nothing else to do, which makes it the single most perfect bad weather task imaginable. And rope changed everything downstream of it. Better shelters, snares, traps, tools bound to handles. An enormous share of early human technology quietly depends on string. And string was almost certainly invented by somebody stuck inside, waiting out exactly the kind of storm you're picturing right now. Tools and rope weren't the whole story either. People were also upgrading the shelter itself. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something you wouldn't expect from 77,000 years ago: bedding. Real layered bedding, sedges, rushes, and grasses arranged deliberately into sleeping mats, topped with leaves from a plant that acts as a natural insect repellent. This wasn't just surviving in that cave. Someone was making it livable, and the bedding was periodically burned and replaced to keep it clean. Pest control, 77,000 years before the term existed. But here's the turn nobody sees coming. All of that, the tools, the rope, the bedding, that's the practical side. What came next is something else entirely: art. Cave in southern France holds paintings roughly 36,000 years old. Lions, horses, rhinos, bears, rendered with a level of anatomical accuracy and motion that still stops researchers today. Some animals are drawn mid-stride, muscle tensed, heads turning. These aren't scribbles. They're the work of people who had watched these animals for thousands of hours and could recreate them from memory underground by the light of a fat-burning lamp. Chauvet isn't an outlier either. There's Lascaux, Altamira, and in Sulawesi, Indonesia, cave art dated to at least 45,000 years ago, currently the oldest known figurative art on Earth. Basically, every rainy afternoon in prehistory produced better art than most people's entire Pinterest board. One detail turns this from a guess into hard evidence. These paintings usually aren't near the cave entrance, where you'd actually shelter from weather. They're deep, sometimes hundreds of meters in, through passages you'd have to crawl through, in chambers you'd never stumble into by accident. Nobody accidentally crawls 400 meters underground. That's not a shortcut to anywhere. That's commitment. Nobody does that when the hunting's good and the sky is clear. You do that when you've already sharpened every tool you own, the rain's been falling for 2 days straight, and there's genuinely nothing left to do but grab a lamp, crawl into the dark, and become the world's first starving artist. Emphasis on starving. We can't prove cave art was a rainy day activity. Nobody left a sticky note that says, bored, painting a rhino, back never. But the pattern lines up too well to ignore. The biggest creative explosion in human prehistory shows up in exactly the places people were most likely to be stuck for days on end. Which points to something even bigger. Rain might not have just produced art, it might have helped produce culture itself, which is a very fancy way of saying humanity's whole personality may have been forged out of pure, unfiltered boredom. Picture it: 15 to 30 people crammed into a confined space for days with absolutely nothing to do. No phones, no snack delivery, just you, your extended family, and whoever's turn it is to talk. You talk, you listen. Information moves, mostly because there's nowhere else for it to go. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study comparing daytime conversations to nighttime, fireside ones among the Jew/Hoansi in the Kalahari Desert. During the day, talk stayed practical. Land, resources, disputes, basically prehistoric HR meetings. But at night around the fire, over 80% of conversation shifted to stories, songs, and ceremony. Turns out Firelight is just a really effective mood lighting app. Softened faces, lowered guards, and suddenly everyone's an open book. The campfire wasn't just heat, it was the original social network, except nobody was doom scrolling, everybody was actually listening. What got shared around it wasn't idle chatter, it was survival data. Where the water holes dry up, which plants are safe, where the good flint is, how to read a specific animal's trail. 0 likes, 0 followers, 100% life or death engagement. Beyond the practical stuff, there was something else too. Myths. Explanations for why the rain falls and where it goes. Every ancient culture on record has rain mythology, because the sky is crying sounds a lot better around a fire than we genuinely have no idea. Please stop asking. One fact alone proves how strong that oral memory became. The oldest verified oral histories on Earth, stories confirmed against actual geological evidence, are Australian Aboriginal accounts of sea level changes from roughly 7,000 years ago. 7,000 years, carried by nothing but people telling each other a story, over and over, with 0 spelling mistakes and 0 group chat screenshots. Try getting a rumor to survive intact for 1 afternoon, let alone 7 millennia. So rainy days weren't dead time. They were transmission time, when knowledge passed from old to young, when skills were taught hands-on, when the group's shared memory got refreshed and reinforced. Basically the world's first cloud backup, except the cloud was, ironically, also the problem. There's a side to this most people skip over entirely. Rain wasn't always the enemy. Sometimes it was the best thing that could happen, which, frankly, rain could use the good PR. After heavy rain, the ground turns soft, and soft ground means perfect tracks. Deep, sharp, easy to read. What walked past, how long ago, how fast, which direction. Some of the best tracking conditions on the planet show up right after a storm breaks. It's basically nature handing you the answer key after the exam. Rain also meant water. Ancient humans collected and stored it. Natural rock hollows that fill during rain show up near nearly every known prehistoric campsite. And some were clearly carved deeper on purpose to hold more. The world's first water bottle, and it never once needed a subscription. And it wasn't just water. Mushrooms and certain plants boom after rain. Tubers pull easier out of wet soil. Insects surface. A rainy stretch didn't shut down the food supply, it just changed the menu. Groups who understood that shift had a real edge over the ones who didn't, the prehistoric equivalent of knowing which restaurants are actually open on a holiday. Termites are the clearest case. In tropical Africa, they swarm right after rain, one of the most protein-dense food sources around, and you don't need a single tool to eat them. You just pick them up. Chimpanzees still gorge on termite swarms after storms today, no manners required. Early humans almost certainly did the same, probably at a much bigger scale, and definitely with just as little chewing. So, what did ancient humans actually do when it rained for days on end? Everything that mattered, and none of it involved a streaming service. They kept the fire alive. They built the tools they'd need for the next hunt. They stitched the clothing that would carry them through winter. They twisted the rope that held their shelters together. They ground the pigment that ended up on cave walls, hundreds of meters underground. They told the stories that carried survival knowledge across generations. And when the rain finally broke, they walked outside onto soft ground, covered in perfect tracks, and got straight back to work. No easing into Monday required. Rain didn't slow them down. It gave them time to prepare for everything that came next. Every tool, every stitch of clothing, every story, every painting on a cave wall, all of it came out of downtime. Out of the hours they couldn't go outside and had nothing to do but sit by a fire and think, which, credit where it's due, is more than most of us manage with a fully charged phone and infinite scroll. Boredom, the way you experience it, wasn't really available to them. When rain is hammering rock over your head and your next month depends on what your hands make in the next few hours, there's no room left for empty time. There's only the fire, the work in front of you, and whatever you decide to build before the sky lets go. No, I'm so bored. Just, I'm so bored I invented rope. Look around at everything humans have made since. Somewhere in that count, quietly, sits a rainstorm that never let up, and one very damp, very unimpressed ancestor who just wanted the hunting to resume, and accidentally invented civilization instead.